Ta-da! Good morning. Tone the microphone down just a bit. Great. I'm not going to stand behind the podium. It's kind of boring, so I'm going to walk around a little bit and chat. First of all, everything that you're currently thinking about American politics, just take a second. It's all true. I have not talked to the press since we dropped out of the race, because the set of expletives that would have come out of my mouth would have been unpleasant and would not have portrayed me in a good light. What's really interesting is I used to think that you could run almost the perfect campaign and not lose. Well, the Cruz campaign is actually an example of how you can literally do almost everything you set out to do, but still wind up losing. So let me just jump to the end. Donald Trump is a very well-known TV personality. He's been on TV for 15 years. People believe that they got to know him through that process. And so the day Donald Trump announced for president, he had 32% of the Republican primary vote. The day we dropped out, he had 32% hardcore support of Republican primary voters, but had won enough other people over in order to get him the nomination. Contrast that to the day that Ted Cruz announced for office in March of 2015, we had 2%. And by the time we ended, 17 candidates later, we finished in second place. The only thing good about second place is it normally puts you in first place going into 2020, but I won't talk about that today. But I do think about it every day, so I'll leave that to your imagination. As you might have gathered by the gray hair, I'm a little old. I'll be 59 in November, which means that I had a chance to work with Margaret Thatcher, the Conservative Party, Ronald Reagan, the Bushes, et cetera, et cetera. And oh, by the way, the definition of a consultant is somebody that's made every mistake more than once, but is somehow still good enough to still be in business. And when you get to my age, you kind of figure out what you should and shouldn't do. So I hopefully will be able to share that a little bit. This is basically an organizational chart of what we did. But what's interesting is that you'll notice it's organized both vertically and horizontally. Okay? What I mean by that is you are both bottom up and top down, but you're also horizontally as it relates to each state. So in every state and 5 territories in the District of Columbia, we had precinct workers, folks who actually worked where people vote. Because one of the things you're going to hear from me throughout this presentation is that I know everybody wants to talk about the wizardry, the pageantry, the brilliance, right? The digital, the online. Well, let me tell you, this business hasn't changed since Caesar. It's about people talking to people. At the basic bottom line, it is just neighbors talking to neighbors. So digital is important, how you communicate is important, radio is important, it's all important. But people where they live make decisions based on what's in their own self-interest. And the best person to tell somebody about what might be in their own best interest is a neighbor. Anybody want to disagree with me about that? Good. That's a good start. Usually there's one person, usually a grad student. Anyway. Ta-da! Neighbors talking to neighbors. Now, a member of my staff put together this slide, and if I was politically correct, it would be a man talking to a woman or, a racially mixed group. So I understand that there are more than white men in the world, but for the purposes of this slide, that's what it is. All politics is local. What that means is that decisions about voting are made at the very local level, at the family level, around the dinner table. Those families that still eat dinner together, but generally speaking, it's made as a family unit. Folks want to vote for somebody who is like them, only smarter, but doesn't act like it. People want to vote for someone who shares their values, but doesn't be super preachy about it. So 99% of the electorate understand that they don't have time to run for office, that they don't have time to learn everything that there is to learn. So they're really looking for a candidate or elected officials who might act the way they would act if they happened to have been elected to office. So as you can kind of get a theme here, it's all about connecting. It's about connecting with voters. It's about connecting with leaders. It's about connections. Okay. In the United States and many sophisticated places around the world, such as Germany, running campaigns is a complicated business. Those campaigns that normally win bring simplicity to complexity. The best consultants are the one that you think is overpaid because they manage to bring great simplicity in messaging from a great complexity of information that's out there. One of the things that Attorney General Cuccinelli and I were talking about just a little while ago is that the one thing that set the Cruz campaign apart from every other presidential campaign was our ability to understand who we were talking to. From day one, every volunteer that we tried to recruit, every voter that we tried to talk to, was aimed at building relationships to then get them elected to go to the national convention and be a delegate to the convention. The Trump campaign and other campaigns thought that these were two separate processes. There was a vote. There were state conventions to allocate who went to the National Republican Convention. But for us, it was always connected from day one. So one of the things I think Attorney General Cuccinelli will say today is that by the time the Republican National Convention actually convened, the majority of the delegates there were for Ted Cruz. Now you're saying, okay, how could they be for Ted Cruz but us not be the nomination? Because states in various forms, you had to vote for whoever won your state with the popular vote. So while the sentiment of the convention was for Ted Cruz, they were bound by different regulations and such to vote for Trump, and before that, we had dropped out. So we kind of accomplished almost everything we wanted to during the course of the campaign and lost. So it is a pleasure for me to be here today. I wish I was in the United States kicking Hillary Clinton's butt. But we're not. The best campaigns are the ones that do extraordinarily simple things extraordinarily well. The worst thing a campaign can do is try and execute 12 different tactics and do all of them poorly. A campaign has to be built around the resources that it has and the time and energy and money that you can devote to each tactic. And everything you do, whether it be online, digital, mail, TV ads, every single act, every single thing that you do during the course of the campaign should be geared at encouraging neighbors to talk to their neighbors. Because when a neighbor answers a question for a neighbor as to why they should vote for a candidate, there are a number of interesting things happen. Neighbors generally have shared values. They're from the same community. They understand the circumstances that their neighbor lives in and those things that they do. The other thing I want you to understand is that younger voters vote on their hopes and aspirations about the future. Why? Because they're younger and they have a lot longer to live. Older voters vote based on what they're afraid of. Losing their health, losing their homes, not being able to pay their bills. Not only that, but one of the key things that the Cruz campaign did is we basically built a data file on every voter in the United States. We could tell you basically a lot about them to the point that we knew who we should be recruiting as volunteers based on how they scored. So we knew that people who would share our values, who would support the positions that we were taking in the campaign. So by the time we were done, we had 320,000 volunteers. We had 500,000 people who had sent us, checks. And we had several million ID'd voters who were for us, which gave us a heck of a base in each state in order to put together an organization. So this is the map that I looked at, and this is the first time I've looked at it in several months, and I'm very pleased about that. But this basically breaks up the entire country, shows you the regional political directors, who they were, the states that they were responsible for. And also on the far right-hand side were the dates that primary or convention took place. And you'll notice that we tried to break it up so not everybody had too many early states, not everybody had too many late states. But one of the things that I think is interesting that I want you to note is when you go through state by state, there were many states that were selecting delegates to the convention before anybody voted. Now, one of the things that the campaign figured out was that the political party has a set of rules, the state has a set of rules, and those things mesh. So many of the parties were picking delegates before anybody actually voted. Now, remember, when you vote, the popular vote is an allocation of delegates to the convention. Okay, Trump 28% of the delegates, Cruz 20% of the delegates. But it does not say that those delegates have to necessarily vote for the candidate that they're pledged to. Now, in most states, they were pledged for the first ballot at the national convention or the second ballot at the national convention. So very often what was happening is that while we might have only won 25% of the allocation of delegates, 80% of the delegates from that state were emotionally with us because we've been working with them all the way through the process and helped them get elected at the political, local, and state level. And one of the things that Attorney General Cuccinelli did so phenomenally well is that we very seamlessly transferred our state leadership teams and our volunteers and those people who were working on the campaign into the delegate process. And there was no doubt that if it had gone to a brokered convention, I think we would have done extremely well. So the other thing that's rather, I'll say, unique, if I was being a little crueler, I'd say odd, about our political process is that in many states in the United States, you don't have to be a Republican to vote in the Republican primary. That's called an open primary, where anybody in any political party can vote in our primary. A closed primary is a election where only registered Republicans can show up and vote. Now, it is interesting to note that Ted Cruz won many of the closed primary states, while Donald Trump was winning many of the open primary states. So you can see that for whatever reason, the Republican Party in the United States has decided to open up its candidate selection process to non-Republicans. So in some ways, you can see where that would be very good. But in other ways, it also made it very possible for somebody who was not a traditional Republican, like Donald Trump, to come in and basically win the Republican nomination. Now, there were several other things that ran through my mind as I would say winning. Hijacking ran through my mind. Absconding with ran through my mind. But I didn't say any of those. I was just thinking those, and I'm just sharing the thought. Also, in every state and territory, there will either be a standard election, a primary, where some states have a convention or a caucus where they select who goes to the convention and in what percentages. I already discussed a little bit that some of them are bound, which means they have to vote for a certain candidate at the convention for a certain number of ballots, and some are not. Now, what makes it very, very difficult is that every state and territory in the District of Columbia is different. There is no one set of rules. So what we had to do was basically go through, look at the political party rules, the state rules, and there were times during the campaign where the political party and the state were at odds with what exactly the rules were. And the reason I bring that up is because it's very easy to get wrapped around the axle or confused or distracted or concerned about externalities that are not that important. And what I want to bring you back to is that all of the things that all of you do in a political process, every single day you have to go back to, okay, is what I'm doing help me communicate with voters who can then talk to their neighbors? So if there's one thing you get out of my little speech today, I would like it to be that don't be distracted by the bells, the whistles, the data, the TV ads. It's about neighbors talking to neighbors. So in our campaign, there were political rules, federal rules, state and local rules, administered by 3,000 local officials. So here's another fascinating thing about the political process, that elections are controlled in the United States at the county level or at the town level. So imagine having to deal with 3,000 local officials as to how their process is going to be conducted locally. Now, you might have guessed one of the reasons why I firmly believe in grassroots neighbor-to-neighbor contact is there's a very good chance that I'm going to have people in my organization that are friends with these 3,000 people and can call and find out exactly what's going on and those kinds of things. Now, what's very fascinating, the exact opposite of the campaign that Cruz ran was the campaign that Donald Trump ran. And listen, let me say, without a doubt, we lost. Losing stinks. But I'm not standing here thinking, oh, we won, we're great. I'm kind of standing here saying we're great and we lost. So you figure that one out. So Donald Trump, because he was a media personality, because he had 100% name ID, would fly in, have a big event, and fly out. We would put our candidate on a bus in Iowa and go to all 99 counties. We'd put our candidate on a bus in Wisconsin and go to every single county. So you can imagine how annoyed I was. Well, first of all, being on a bus in Iowa for months at a time is really very exciting. So you can imagine how annoyed we would be as the TV media would cover Donald Trump's plane arrival. They'd cover him like he was the Pope, right? The Trump plane is arriving. He's speaking. He's leaving. It was quite annoying. And it really hasn't changed. But what happened is because there was no focus on neighbors talking to neighbors or the grassroots, that never changed from the primary to the general. So one of the problems that Mr. Trump is having right now is a good grassroots campaign is worth 2 or 3 points. It's not worth 15 points. A great ground game isn't going to win you an election, but it's good for 2 or 3 points where neighbors are talking to neighbors. So in close races, grassroots matters. And it's one of the things that the U.S. press is constantly talking about with the Trump campaign right now is there's just not a ground game. Okay. As I mentioned before, I have kept my mouth shut. I have not talked to the media for months on end. And I'm probably not until this election's over. They're going to find me at a bar somewhere, quite intoxicated. But here's something that happened, and I'll leave all of you as very smart, sophisticated people to decide how much it mattered. During the course of the primary, Donald Trump got over $2 billion of free earned media. What he said, where he went, the rallies, okay? The press covered him. Dollar-wise, it was worth over $2 billion. Now, we won a whole bunch of states, right? So we were clearly the second campaign, the second best campaign. In many states, we won. We got $200 million of free media. So from all of your experience, what happens if you're outspent that much? And that's not paid ads. That's just free online advertising. And TV, radio, everything. Now, our dear friends in the media like to say that they don't make, they just report. They just report what happens. Well, in our primary election, a number of news media decided that Donald Trump was better for them to get people watching, sell ads, whatever the issue is, than anybody else. So when the media decides that one candidate is better than everybody else for them, it causes a bit of a problem. And I think some of you have heard there have been some groups online that skewed some things to make certain candidates' search engine optimization work better than other campaigns. Won't even address any of that. And I only bring this up as you really do have to work extremely hard. Now, Ron and Alice, by far, were the two best spokespeople on TV during the entire campaign. They were thoughtful, they were honest, the problem was, in Wisconsin, the night that we won Wisconsin, having been on a bus for a month, the night we won Wisconsin, the news media gave us 4 minutes. They covered our victory speech for 4 minutes. And then one network in particular then did 20 minutes on why Donald Trump's nomination was inevitable. Can you imagine? We just won a state. We were on a roll, and they specifically did a show saying how Donald Trump was going to be the nominee. This while we were winning the delegate battle to get people to the convention, and we knew if we could get to a brokered convention that we would win it. Now, I'll get off my high horse, get back on the ground here. One of the ways that we were able to deal with that, although eventually unsuccessfully, is we made sure that our grassroots organization in every state had information from us as to what they should say based on what was in the news. And we made sure that at the state and local level, we had people who were talking to the media. I think Alice is probably going to talk a little bit about how we had surrogate speakers in every state, that we had speakers everywhere that could work with the media at various levels. Also complicating our process just a bit is the fact that we have early voting, where voters can actually go to a government office in person and vote anywhere up to 30 or 60 days before the actual election day. More and more states are doing vote by mail, which means that people are voting 30 and 60 days in advance of the actual date. For example, the reason Donald Trump can't be replaced on the ballot is because people are already voting. So there are many states that are voting by mail where votes are already being cast. And then finally, November 8th will be Election Day, and we'll select a new president. Okay. I wanted to break out what the United States political situation looks like when you're running a national campaign. So there are 3,000 counties, 16 boroughs that operate like counties in Alaska, 11 census areas that are sort of like counties, 69 parishes in Louisiana like counties, 42 independent cities like counties, and the Federal District of Columbia. Then we also select delegates to our national convention from Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, Northern Marianas Islands, and American Samoa. Yes, we had grassroots organization in American Samoa. Guam, for example, is not only a different day, but a different time zone. So to do a volunteer call in Guam, you had to remember that it was the next day in the opposite time zone. I have done more 3 a.m. calls to constituents in Guam than any person in the United States. I'm just proud to say that. That and a euro will get me a cup of coffee. So, the digital campaign. All of us in this room know. I can remember very clearly 1996 when I actually said to a congressional candidate, don't you just have some kid that can put up a web page? Okay, fast forward to 2016. Your websites and the digital operations are like aircraft carriers on which you fly everything on and off of. It is amazing. You use it to organize, raise money, communicate. So one of the things that we found out was that how are we doing for time? Okay. So, and I interrupted myself mid-thought. Okay. One of the interesting things about the digital aspect of the campaign, and I want to make this very, very clear, it is completely and totally the same as your ground game. It is completely and totally focused on neighbors talking to neighbors. The words you use, the way you choose to communicate something is very, very important. One of the things that we did is that every time we sent out a message, we would send out at least 10 different versions of it based on whether you were a man or woman, married, single, had kids, your age, et cetera, et cetera. Because the way you can effectively communicate with me is different than the way you can effectively communicate with my wife, which is why I understand that, because I have a lot of trouble communicating with my wife because I think like a 59-year-old guy. And I wish I thought like my wife, that if any of you have any advice, I'll stick around and you can. Hi, Kathy. But the news cycle now is 24/7, right? I can remember back in the day when a newspaper reporter would call you at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you had until the next day to figure out your answer, right? It was the next news cycle. It was the next time they were going to print the paper. Now you're lucky if they call you at all for a comment, right? So Twitter, Facebook, online, social media. How crazy has it gotten when the media now quotes a blog as a news source? So right now we all have to combat negative messaging or falsehoods or information that makes no sense regularly and routinely. And it's very, very hard. But what I want you to understand is everything that you say and do online has to match up with what you want neighbors saying to neighbors. So, what is the one thing that I wanted you to get out of this little chat today with me? That neighbors talking to neighbors is fundamentally it, and it's the best way to impact an election. And everything that the campaign does should be skewed in that fashion. Very quickly, let me just talk about the importance of metrics. Anything you can't count didn't happen. We had metrics for everything. Phone calls, doors knocked, county chairman. We had conservative faith leaders in every single count. And we would basically keep tabs of absolutely everything. One of the things that we made sure is that somebody, one person, was responsible for every aspect of the campaign from the bottom to the top. There's never been a statue erected to a committee. I've never been able to yell at a committee and have anything happen. Somebody has to be responsible for every aspect of a campaign. Many, the word many, is not a number, and soon is not a time. If it's not a metric that you can't measure, then it's not really a metric. And these were just the first 3 states. Let me just wrap up very quickly with these few thoughts. Running an extensive grassroots field operation is very hard work. It's why so many campaigns stay away from it. That's why so many campaigns, it's the last thing that they really want to do. But if you really want to win the day, and the other reason is you want to build the party for future years, is how to get young people involved, is how to get thought leaders involved. Metrics and goal setting are absolutely critical. All methods of talking to voters are critically important. Nothing is more important than a neighbor talking to a neighbor about shared values, common interests, and why their vote for a particular candidate is important. I'm now going to pass it back to Ron Nearing. Thank you very much, and we'll be around after this little presentation to take questions. Please don't ask me any of the hard ones. Thank you.